Where does disability rank in popular culture? Are we being represented correctly? Are we being represented at all? Are all disabilities created equally? I'm going to try to discuss this today. The following was recorded as a part of Uchi Production Studios. All rights are reserved by Kevin Nunez. Hello and welcome to the Purposely Broken World. I'm your host, Kevin Nunez. This is a part of the Advocacy Life podcasting network. I am Kevin Nunez. I'm a disability advocate who's been serving the disability community for the majority of my life. But this is not about my accomplishments, rather what I've learned from my faith. Welcome to the show. My name is Gary Nunez, and I want to welcome you officially to the Purposely Broken World. Why is this the Purposely Broken World? I know some of you are confused because it said on your search bar, the Advocacy Life podcast network. I started this podcast in 2021. I'm happy to announce that we are going to expand into 2 different podcasts under the same branding network as the Advocacy Life. More on the second podcast in a minute, probably at the end of this. But this is about the Purposely Broken World. The reason I started this podcast was because there are 3 things that I identify with that I think always interact. And I want people to not only realize that these 3 subjects interact with each other, but by not allowing them to be part of the same conversation, we are neglecting our own humanity. That is faith, that is disability, and that is how society works. Yes, society is broken. I'm going to use some silly examples in the shows and TV we watch that are quote unquote popular for today's world to explain how faith, society, and disability all interact. First of which, officially, the numbers say that 1 in 4 Americans are diagnosed with a disability, which this may be true according to the CDC. But to me, disability is not an if, it's a when. Because we all fall down, we all have broken bones, we've all needed help from someone from time to time. So ergo, to me, this is a when you get a disability. I wanted to talk about the way the world sees us in media, because frankly, we all consume media, whether we want to admit it or not. Even though I am 35, and I am probably no longer considered young by any stretch, and I don't consider myself young anymore, I wanted to use this platform to connect with a lot of younger audiences, because society has forgotten disability. It's forgotten faith. It's forgotten how society works. So I hope that this audience is filled with young people. That's why one of the first things I want to talk about today is disability in reality TV. I'm going to use reality TV as a caveat and hopefully examples of how what we see on our screens is not always an accurate representation of disability, and how all disabilities are not created equal. We've all seen Big Brother. It is a competition series where individuals are locked in a house for the summer, and they compete in regular competitions against each other, and then at the very end, those who were voted off by their peers for not competing in the competitions, at the end of the program, after they spent the summer together, those who were eliminated vote on who they think is the best competitor of these challenges. And just because you've done X or Y on the challenges doesn't mean you're going to win because you're the best athlete. It depends a lot on social game and social interactions. Now, where does disability come in? Because disability is not always represented in these shows. Or is that true? The fact is, one of the early seasons, a contestant named Evan, who is on the autism spectrum, not only competed, but won the entire show of the $1 million prize, based on his particular disability. Not on his disability, in spite of his disability. So, that is a success, right? Because he won in spite of his disability, so he's an inspiration, right? Yes and no. Here's what I mean. Okay, yes, he won. And I understand living with someone for 90 plus days and winning a competition is not easy by any stretch. And it's not always easy understanding a person with disabilities. So it is an accomplishment. I'm not taking that away. But this was used as quote-unquote inspiration porn. Not in a sexual way by any means when I say inspiration porn. What I mean by inspiration porn is anytime we've seen someone with any kind of disability, we idolize them because of their disability, and we don't see them as a complete person because all we see is the disability first. So, Evan, and again, you can find more about him in the show notes I will attach at the end of this episode. And his story, to be more official. He won. He was this, great inspiration. He actually came back and competed again for the All-Star edition because this show has been on for multiple seasons now. Probably close to 20 years. It's kind of like Survivor, but they're in a house and not out in the wilderness. The point is that society moved on once you won. Fast forward a few years in the same program, a contestant named Brittany D'Angelo, which, by the way, is also in the show notes. So you don't have to take my word for any of this. You can actually read about these individuals on various platforms. I gave you some examples in the show notes. Brittany D'Angelo won the fan vote, which is the popular vote. She didn't win the actual competition, but she won the fan vote, which is, of course, like $100,000 or something. So it's kind of like a second place, but the fans vote for it, not the contestants themselves. She was the fan favorite. At the end of that season, she revealed that she was on the autism spectrum as well. So why is it okay for Evan to be openly autistic and D'Angelo was able to hide her diagnosis for 90 plus days? Obviously, their disabilities affected them differently. No one should be forced to disclose their disability or any part of their disability if they so choose. Now, that being said, this kind of, on a personal note, I don't want to say angers me because it doesn't anger me. I'm not envious, not in a bad way. But as a person who uses a wheelchair, if you're watching this on YouTube, I have cerebral palsy, as I said. I cannot hide my disability. I'm judged before I leave the door, as I walk out the door. I get the same question all the time. Are you paralyzed? Does your junk work? Yada, 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 yada. But that's not the point. This is not about me. My point is, we have to stop seeing the disability as all of the person. Yes, the disability is part of who they are, but it's not their whole story. Brittany D'Angelo was able to hide her disability for the entire program. And maybe that was not her intention, maybe it was, I don't know. She claims when she watched the show that she wanted people to judge her for who she was, and that's perfect. That's fantastic. But what if you can't? And this brings me to my third subject. There's another program called The Circle, which is on Netflix. It's one of their biggest shows. It is another competition series. In this case, you're not competing with anyone directly. That is because all the contestants are locked in their various apartments, and they can only compete in various challenges through a screen. In that program, they can, hide themselves. They can be a catfish, pretend to be someone else. Raven, and again, she's also in the show notes, is openly deaf, because she is deaf, but she chose on this opportunity not to hide her disability. I'm not going to compare D'Angelo to Raven because they're two completely different disabilities. And yes, Raven did have assistance. She did have an interpreter with her on the program. The gentleman was her interpreter. He was with her in the apartment, but he did not participate in any of the competitions. In the screen, he was strictly the interpreter. Now, this goes back to the same thing. We tend to group disability as one giant thing, but these are three completely different disabilities. Yes, two are diagnosed with autism, meaning Brittany D'Angelo and Evan from Big Brother season 2012, if you want to look that up in your notes, in the show notes of this episode. But, and then you have Raven, who was openly deaf, and her season is still ongoing at the moment of this episode. It is January 18th when I'm recording this. So, as of this moment, her season has not been revealed as who won yet. But she's still competing and locked in this apartment with her interpreter. I bring this up because you have three distinct disabilities that have made their way into popular culture. In the case of Raven, she actually had somewhat of a following prior to the circle because of Twitter and whatnot. So she had somewhat of a following. Obviously, she blew up after the show because it's hard to hide an African American woman with purple hair. It's very easy to spot now, so I'm sure she gets called out on the street every day when she walks around. She's actually from Washington, D.C. You can again find that in the show notes. But then again, you have myself, who rides around in a 300-pound tank all day. My chair is 300 pounds. I weigh 135, 140. So, but then again, when you see me, I can't speak to the others that I mentioned on this podcast when they were diagnosed or what have you. I've only have a few articles I found online for this episode. But it's totally different when you're born with a disability. What does society seem or deem as acceptable? What is okay? What is not okay? You know what I find so disconcerting? We pour billions of dollars into programs like DARE, Drug Awareness Resistance Education, or at least that's what it was called when I was a kid, and to help children avoid drugs. But there are very few programs out there to teach children about various disabilities. That's sad. Stop and think about that. 3 different disabilities seen on TV. 2 were on the same program. One is on a program that was just released technically late last year because it was December. And yet, they're flash in the pans. They'll be forgotten about by tomorrow, by Thanksgiving of 2023. You want to remember who they are? I'm just a guy on a podcast. So where do we see people like myself? Where do we see people like Brittany D'Angelo? Where do we see people like Evan? Where do we see people like Raven? Where do they rank? What is value? Where does education begin? Where does respect begin? The purpose of this podcast is not for me to answer these questions. It's strictly for you to sit down with your family and your friends and start the conversation on your dinner table. When you go to church, and I'm sure I can't speak for Evan or Brittany or Raven what their religious backgrounds are, but when you go to church, how do you interact with the disabled kid? How do you interact with the disabled family? This is the January episode of the Purposely Broken World podcast. You will see another podcast episode in February for the Purposely Broken World. The other podcast is going to be called The Normal Life, where we interview people with disabilities and just let them tell their stories. Those will be the two platforms on this. The two podcasts: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. I might do a little bit on TikTok every once in a while, little short clips. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'm Kevin Nunez. We have 3 other different writers who produce blogs, because we also use the Advocacy Life to blog. That's the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. This has been the Purposely Broken World, part of the Advocacy Life podcast network. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. That's how we make a difference. See you soon. Stay blessed. Be blessed. God bless.